Dill, I want to start from the top, maybe like a do-over. Replace the voices in Jake's headphones with a new episode of Columbia House Party. Jake, what's up, man?
Not much. You're getting creative.
Yeah, I mean, look, and then the fact that we actually did have to, this was the rare two-take intro because there actually was an issue with you being able to hear me in your headphones. This is lining up to be a perfectly bad podcast episode, but I'm excited for this one.
Me too. This is a band that it's one of those bands that I like, but I find very interesting, or I find more interesting than I like, I should say.
Okay, that makes more sense. This is also a band that I am recording this from home in the region right now, and before we came on to record, my brother asked which band we were recording, and I told him, and he made fun of them because they were one of his best friend's favorite bands, and he does not like having to listen to them all the time. This is not the only brother music banter you're going to hear on this episode. We're going to have a guest a little later on who also has an attachment to today's band through his brother and has a legendary story about this band and his family's lore. Should be a fun one. Thank you to everyone who's listening, whether you're a new listener who comes for today's guest or gets tricked into thinking this is a sports episode and not a music episode, for an episode that is about the intersection of baseball and sadness. And we have the perfect guest for that coming up in a little bit. Today, we're talking about one of my personal favorite albums and one of my personal favorite bands. This is an album I ranked at number 6 on my all-decade list when we did that bonus episode for our Patreon supporters. This band also had an album that came in at number 18 on my list. So needless to say, this episode is a bit of a selfish one on my part. One of my favorite bands of the 2010s. It's also a pretty influential album at that time in the genre, or at least the subgenre that they went down. And as we'll find out, a gateway from kind of the indie scene back into the modern emo scene for a lot of people. You and our guest included, Jake. So today, we're talking about the debut full-length from Modern Baseball, Sports.
You reckon you grew up in a town that said reckon all the time, all your time so vile yet concrete. And I heard little rumors here and there, little peeps that you may never leave. I swear to God if you never leave. Well, here goes nothing, I mean everything. Fingers crossed every morning after a night of no sleep, wondering if there will ever be me. But I guess I'm doing just fine, texting you suns and haze with a smile or winky face, hoping to get the same. But I won't fucking wait for you to stop lingering. You got to cling to this town that you supposedly hate, and though it kills me to say, if you get stuck, oh, I'm just gonna leave. See ya, sucker. On the corner of Canal and Broadway, where that huge sign says love me, and shrouded graffiti and the stench of weed, my heart just started screaming, what if she just never leaves? I reckon you grew up in a town that said reckon all the time, but what gives you the right to wreck everything?
That song is called See Ya Sucker, and we would now like to say hello, sucker, to our guest. And who better to bring in and to talk modern baseball than the Score's senior MLB writer, the sad baseball boy, Jonah Birenbaum. Jonah, what's up, man?
What's up, boys? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This episode is going to touch on my two favorite things: modern baseball and ennui and sadness and fetishizing your own sadness. I guess that's more than two things, but nevertheless.
I can't believe Jonah already came through the gate talking about how much he loves sadness.
Yeah, and also he screwed up the count, so we can check off a third box there with self-loathing, and you can add that to your list, Jonah. We kid. Jonah has rounded into...
It's an extensive list.
Yeah, a happy domesticated boy with a new pup. How's the pup doing, Jonah?
She's doing all right. She's adjusting. She's a rescue, and from what we can glean, just based on her behavior, she had a pretty rough past. She spent the majority of her life in a shelter, so she's never really been domesticated or bonded with humans for that matter. So everything is sort of new for her and frightening. But she's coming along. She's made quite a bit of progress in the 4 weeks that we've had her. And, it's nice to see, whenever she has like even a mini breakthrough, it's extremely gratifying.
Domesticated after a lifetime of not connecting well with humans. You and her both.
The parallels were too obvious for me not to adopt her.
Where did you guys adopt through?
We got through an adoption agency called Paws Across the Water, which was founded in 2017. So they're relatively new, but they routinely go across the border, whether that's into Mexico or into the Caribbean, to bring back some dogs that are being sheltered in those countries, and then adopt them out to forever homes in the Greater Toronto area. And our experience with them was nothing but positive, and really can't say enough about them, really.
Well, there you go. So if you are looking to either support an organization like that or to possibly adopt yourself, Paws Across the Water. For those of you who don't know, Jonah is a very, very excellent baseball analyst over at The Score. You can follow him on social at Birenbaum. Jonah is also one of mine and Jake's kind of preeminent concert-going friends. I would say Jonah is probably number 2 to Jake in terms of the people I've seen the most concerts with. It maybe even a 1A, 1B situation. Certainly, Jonah, you and I have road tripped more.
Yeah, we've hit up Buffalo. We've taken our talents to... Where else have we gone?
I don't know. It might just be Buffalo.
All right.
But yeah, didn't even get a AAA game in there. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, you go to Buffalo, that's enough road trip for a lifetime.
We did not see Modern Baseball in Buffalo. We saw the Front Bottoms in Buffalo, but we actually Modern Baseball has a Blake and Jake origin story. Part of this podcast's origin story is that was one of the first shows Jake and I saw together. MoBo with Joyce Manor, the day of Game 7 of the two.
We kind of saw Modern Baseball.
Yeah, look, it was the day of Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals, and we had to drunkenly get to Tall Boys to see Blocked by James. How could you miss it? So we did get Joyce Manor in, and then kind of Modern Baseball while we watched the game at the back of the bar and then left. But it still counts as part of the origin story, as you may have learned.
Sorry, Blake, in that I also only kind of saw Modern Baseball, because while my body was present at that show in Seattle, my mind was elsewhere.
So I teased this off the top about the brother connection here. Generally in this segment, what we do is we ask the guests why they wanted to talk about Modern Baseball. I'm going to save that for our next segment. And Jonah, I just want, for any of the audience who doesn't know Jonah and doesn't know what going to shows with Jonah is like, run us through the Modern Baseball concert that is now legendary in the Birenbaum family.
Yeah, it's a part of Birenbaum lore that I think everyone else would like to forget, but I will never be able to forget it, which is ironic because I can't remember it. But my brother, my middle brother, who's 3 years my senior, he lives out west in Whistler, and for a while there, each summer, myself and my parents would head out west, usually somewhere on the west coast of the United States, to meet up with him and have like a mini vacation. So in July of 2015, incidentally, literally the weekend before the Blue Jays overhauled their roster by trading for David Price and Troy Tulowitzki, blah, 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 we visited my brother, and we met up in Seattle. And it just so happens that on the Friday night that we arrived, Modern Baseball was playing a show with Cymbals Eat Guitars at this super cool venue in Seattle. So my brother nabbed tickets. My brother and I have a lot of overlap in terms of our musical taste, and we were super stoked. And it was our first night there. And so we decided to, imbibe as friends do, concert goers do. And, we might have had one or two, or in my case, 17 too many. And, I have the faintest recollection of Cymbals Eat Guitars' set because they were opening. They were the second opener, I believe, and Modern Baseball was headlining. And by the time MoBo hit the stage, I was so far gone, not too far gone to post a coherent Instagram photo with a typo-free caption. But at some point, either towards the end of their set or after their set, I wandered off from the venue. And that's where my memory of the evening stops. I woke up in our hotel room covered in vomit. And the next morning, my brother had to fill in the details and regale me with this horrifying anecdote of how I wandered off, and these kindly strangers found me in a ditch and took my phone from me, I was completely incoherent and, covered in vomit and really in a state of major disrepair. And they called my brother, who then, trekked through the streets of Seattle to come find me. He has absolutely, no knowledge of the streets of Seattle or the topography, or, he had never been there before in his life. And he came and rescued me and brought me home, gallantly back to the hotel where, I promptly passed out and woke up to a very uncomfortable conversation with my parents and a all-time hangover. And it kind of, put a bit of a damper on the Blue Jays weekend because they were in Seattle. I guess that's a detail that I omitted. We were there to see some Blue Jays baseball in their second home, if you will. So I couldn't really comment on how Modern Baseball's set was, but I can tell you that that was a night that forever, I think, tarnished my image, at least to a certain degree, irreparably in my parents' mind. And it's a night that they can ever lord over me because I wasn't 18 or 19. I was probably like 24 at the time. So a little bit too old to be engaging in those kinds of shenanigans and getting obliterated to that degree. But nevertheless, it is a night that will endure. Well, now you have to go to law
school to win them back.
That's my only path to redemption. It's like that, or become a doctor, or just pop out a few kids or something that'll probably win some goodwill, at least for the next couple decades.
You do have a lovely partner, so I'm sure you got points back for that.
Hopefully.
The miracle of that show being, I don't think that was one of the nights. So guys, Jonah is famous for, at concerts, posting series of Instagram stories of himself screaming the words along with songs. And it's amazing. It's like all of us who know Jonah get really excited when Jonah's going to a show because we know we'll get some of those and probably be in them ourselves. So that's great. My favorite Jonah concert story is, and this is like the me and Steve friendship origin story, the night, Jonah, that we went to see Front Bottoms do 2 albums back to back and then went to Hop Along after. Oh. And like one song into Hop Along, you just disappeared.
Time
like
for me to hop along.
I think you like scrambled to Scott Lewis's place to get an extra ticket from him or something.
Yep, that's right.
And then made it to the second venue and then made it like one song.
Yeah, I made my presence known at the Horseshoe and then got the hell out of there.
Listeners, that is your introduction to Jonah. We're going to give you an introduction to modern baseball after this. All right, so we punted the first usual segment in talking about why we wanted to do this album, why it means a lot to us. And Jake and Jonah, you guys have pretty similar connections to MoBo and what they meant to you over the last 10 years or so. Mine's a little more straightforward. I just came across them and really liked them. The timing just kind of lined up where the upsides from the Wonder Years around 2010 had kind of reinvigorated my interest in the scene, and things like this were back on my radar after a couple of years of being more of a hip hop guy or just sticking with my older music. So, they're a pretty natural fit for me. Like I said, they're one of my favorite bands and had two or three of my favorite albums of the decade. So a little more straightforward there. Jake, for you, this is maybe not a band that you would have had expected to like ahead of liking them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think they're a band that sort of in a roundabout way have ended up being very important to my musical taste rather than them themselves as a band. The next album after we're talking about today, the one that came out in 2014, I think that along with Home Like No Place There Is by The Hotelier kind of brought me back into liking and listening to emo and pop punk after a long time of sort of not listening to that kind of stuff or not taking it seriously or pretending I didn't like it or whatever. But I remember that started getting like, sounds so shitty, but like quote unquote cool music press, I'm putting in giant air quotes, which music like that at the time wasn't really getting. And it made me check it out and I ended up being like, oh, this is great. And so I think while I don't listen to modern baseball a ton, and I wouldn't say they're one of my favorite bands, I would not like a lot of my favorite bands today, I think, without modern baseball, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think Jonah, if I remember our earlier conversations correctly, that's a similar story to you, where you were like kind of a 90s guy, and you were, of course, the drummer in the Regrettables, who sound like a Pearl Jam cover band. And Modern Baseball were one of the bands that brought you back kind of toward this. And I know you and I have bonded a lot over the Wonder Years and the Front Bottoms over the years, but MoBo were kind of your gateway back, I guess, as well, right?
Yeah, very much so. They sparked a reawakening for me, because I was a huge emo guy in early adolescence. I remember listening to Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco ad nauseum in my brother's room, playing Madden on GameCube. And then, you proceed...
GameCube!
Buddy. Kind of an underrated console, but I digress. And as, I proceeded further into adolescence, you drift away from that because it's perceived as uncool. And, I did gravitate away from that and more towards, that archetypal 90s stuff, Pearl Jam, like you said, Oasis, Tragically Hip, Counting Crows, and eventually more like indie alternative stuff like the Weaker Thans and the Hold Steady. But MoBo, and this album specifically, really helped reintroduce me to the genre in my early adult years. And yeah, they were a gateway drug into, my current affinity for the Front Bottoms, the Wonder Years, Mom Jeans, Prince Daddy, the genre at large. And, I think that, they ushered me into a period in my life, where I was okay enjoying emo music unabashedly, unapologetically, and sports was instrumental in that, and was one of the albums, if not the singular album, that really kicked off, a sort of a new period in my music consumption and musical evolution.
I think we're going to see, too, as we go through this, and maybe Mom Jeans are the exception to the list you gave, because they've had some kind of, I don't know if problematic is too strong a word, but they've had some strange interactions with the rest of the scene. But I do think that we're going to see that Modern Baseball had an influence, not just on people like the two of you who were kind of lapsed from the genre and music that sounds like this, but they were, I think, pretty pivotal in, if you're trying to bridge the gap from, where Blink-182 and bands like that in the early 2000s started turning the perspective around and looking inward. And obviously Blink-182 did that in a very self-deprecating way. And then bands like Fall Out Boy did that kind of in a very sarcastic way. MoBo were one of those first bands that really approached kind of these relationship issues and these friendship issues with like an actual analytic eye inward, and kind of exploring the self side of that. So I think, as we dive into some of the lyrical themes on sports, we're going to see some of that, especially as we get into some of if we get into some of the quotes from the band themselves and stuff like that. So let's talk about the band. And just a note off the top here that if you look up older Modern Baseball stuff and the album credits and things like that, one of the singer-songwriters and band members, one of the founding band members, will be credited as Brendan Lukens. They now go by Bren and use they, them pronouns. So if we say Bren or they, that's who we're referring to moving forward. So back in Maryland, Bren and Jake were originally an acoustic duo. Then they met Sean Huber and Ian Farmer, decided to form a band, although Sports is largely just Bren and Jake because they had recorded a bunch of the stuff. Some of the songs on Sports are actually originated as Bren solo stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Farmer was originally helping engineer the recordings at Drexel University, and then eventually shifted to joining the band. Sadly, there is not a great backstory to the Modern Baseball name. They just saw it on a book owned by Jake's father, a book called Modern Baseball Techniques, which sadly, it is very, very tough to find. If you go to Sophie's Floorboard, which is a great resource for music like this, they have uploaded like a zip file of it. But sadly, it appears to be an instructional guide and not a like spiritual baseball book like The Art of Fielding or Zen Way of Baseball or The Way of Baseball. It is unfortunately literally Modern Baseball Techniques. Techniques would then become a compilation title for Modern Baseball later. Jonah, in addition to covering baseball so excellently for the score, you also played some baseball at a decent level. Have you ever opened up Modern Baseball Techniques to work on your pitch repertoire or your stance at the plate or anything like that?
I can't say that I have, but incidentally, I do wonder if the techniques outlined in that book are now dated just because, baseball and baseball analytics have evolved so much in the last decade that I wonder if some of the methodologies outlined in there are now obsolete.
They'd have to be. There's probably a section on how to properly bunt when the real answer now is don't.
Absolutely.
All right, so as they're getting going, they played a lot of small shows around the Philly basement scene, which was populated by other bands like the Menzingers and Cayetana. They were, again, recording sports on Drexel's campus, and a lot of the writing was done by Bren initially. That's per Jake. There really isn't a ton on the band's background because they got a debut out pretty quickly and then saw near immediate success. However, before sports, they did release a split with Marietta called Couples Therapy, which included this song, It's Cold Out Here.
Don't call me now, I am in bed. I've sacrificed all chances for street cred as a result of sick and near the same bedtime for 13 years. But you know this, I've said it before. There's a lot of things I said before. Lots of things you kind of ignored and brushed it off. You always brushed it off. Pacing down the hallway stairs, mental notes of quick repairs to gaps in my story for tomorrow morning of why I was up at this hour. When I have children of my own, and when they have children of their own, I'll spit and spew of my dumbass high school endeavors with prideful tone. But when my freezing lower limbs approached that sly, grinning little shit, I knew the truth in every foul sound I had admitted just 2 nights before. Goodbye was not an option. It's clear to you, but to no one was it clearer than to me. Since day one, I've been locked in. I'm not fucking hanging up. I told you I loved you just outside your mom's place. You laughed and you felt bad as we sat there red-faced. I felt like a bitch, so I told you to get out. But I guess Bren was right, babe, 'cause who's laughing now? I told you I loved you just outside your mom's place. You laughed and you felt bad as we sat there red-faced. I felt like a bitch, so I told you to get out. But I guess Bren was right, babe, 'cause who's laughing now?
And if there is any question about the genre to which modern baseball belongs, that should clear it up, at least on this album. They are an emo band. I'm not sure where on the emo tree they fall, whether it's Midwest or emo revival or emo pop or whatever, but how you can listen to that guitar and those vocals and not think emo, I'm not sure. Had you heard that before, Jonah?
No, I hadn't, but it gave me serious early Blink-182 vibes.
Oh, yeah. The lo-fi, but clear kind of vibe to it. It's good stuff. So from there, the band got connected with Eric Osman, who was at that point their manager, and then decided to create the independent label Lamo Records in Philly, basically just to release sports. He funded a 300 copy pressing with money he had made as a barista. And then after sports was successful down the line, he just kept the label going. So they're now the home of Slaughter Beach Dog, Thin Lips, and Horse, and a bunch of other bands. They even released a compilation in 2015 as a label called Strength in Weakness that sums up, I think, both the label and this band's approach to music and storytelling. So as they were going through this process with sports, as I mentioned, Bren was also working on a side project around the same time. It was called Dude, the Love of Your Life Has Some Serious Issues. He released it for free on Tumblr, and it included an awesome song called How Do I Tell a Girl I Want to Kiss Her that you may remember we talked about on our Lil Peep episode, because Lil Peep sampled that song for his song Kiss. And the song also samples clips from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Once again, if you were curious if this band qualifies as an emo band, they sampled Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Also on Dude, the Love of Your Life Has Some Serious Issues were 2 songs that eventually made it onto sports called The Weekend and I think you were my profile pick once. We're going to talk about The Weeknd in a little bit more detail shortly because it's one of Jonah's favorite songs. But let's get into sports. So this album starts off, and Jonah, I don't know if the writer in you will be bothered by the first song's title the same way that I am. So the first song on the album is Redo, and then there is another song called Redone, which is in the middle of the album. And as much as this album has great album closer, I feel upset that Redo and Redone are not the opener and closer. Does that bother you, Jonah?
I mean, it would have made for a beautiful symmetry, but it doesn't keep me up at night.
Wow. Oh, all right. Thanks for building off my point, you asshole. This is why so many of the lyrics on this album are about, your friends being dicks. But
that doesn't apply here.
It doesn't apply here. Oh boy. Are you going to go through this entire segment only talking in lyrics?
I mean, I kind of just counted on you to turn me into lyrical goo.
Goo. Yeah. Yeah, that's a deep sigh. Yeah.
We should have known
Jake,
better.
you could just go grab dinner or something.
I've been reading about stuff on my phone this whole time anyway, so don't worry about me.
So, Jonah, I guess what we want to talk about off the top is, and I think Redo sets this up, and it also sets back a number of callbacks later throughout the album. What we're talking about here is kind of unrequited love in the digital age specifically, where our penchant for thinking too much and being in our own heads is exacerbated by the fact that if you want, the object of your thinking and your anxiety can be omnipresent because we have, so many resources available to us to drive ourselves crazy, looking at and thinking about people. Is that kind of what helped modern baseball hit for you? That it's just this, not to make a pun about their name, but it's a very modern approach to kind of the romantic problems of your young 20s.
Yeah, I think so. They're in a sense, I guess, the patron saints of being terminally online and seeing the ramifications of that, particularly with respect to their romantic endeavors, really be negative and backfire, and how that conduit and that source of connection can also be sort of an inescapable prison, especially when you're terminally online, which is a theme that they really revisit constantly throughout this album, and seems to be the case for them. And yeah, I think so much of that resonates, especially because in 2012 when this album came out, I was just about to graduate from university and was very much in the nascent stages of being a terminally online dude, and seeing perhaps at the time not recognizing sort of how at times insidious it can be and how harmful it can be, especially when you're trying to get away from something. But yeah, absolutely, that's definitely an entry point that I was like, oh yeah, these guys get it. This is absolutely resonating with me.
And I think, the fact that you were coming out of university at that stage, so you're not too far removed from high school and some of the, I guess, less mature feelings about this kind of stuff. You use the term off the top jokingly, and it's one of our favorite kind of BoJack moments, is fetishizing the sadness. And I think there is a little bit of that here. They do challenge it a little bit. But earlier on in the album, there is not that. And I think that's most clear and kind of how the perspective develops over the course of this album is, I think, most present on one of your favorite tracks, Tears Over Beers.
When I was just a boy, we'll call it 15 or so, I found myself annoyed by a syndrome of sorts in my bones. That girl who's next to me,
right next to oh God.
She found herself bored to tears. She realized if she wanted conversation, she's out of luck for 3 more years. When I moved away from home, 100 miles or so, I knew a change had grown inside my awkwardly long limbs and bones. That girl
That song is like, if you were to say to me, what song reminds you of Jonah, that would be like top 3. It just like
Tears Over Beers
just sounds like a Jonah song. I can hear him yelling.
Pretty much describes my life from 2013 through 2018.
I can hear you screaming it on Instagram.
And so I think a lot of what we want to talk about with this album is, how they challenge some of these kind of typical tropes of, I guess, maybe not masculinity, but just like how they challenge some of the tropes of unrequited love. And I think that in isolation, this song is maybe one of the less mature songs on the album because it does veer a little bit into the rom-com teen movie trope of nice guy thinks he should get the girl instead of the jock. But by changing the perspective course to course, it kind of explores that dynamic a little bit more. Jonah, so I'm wondering, foremost, why is this one of your favorite songs on the album? And I think you agree with Jake that it kind of is a good snapshot for you. But also, where do you see this in kind of the overall theme of the album for you?
I think it typifies one of the major themes of the albums, which is just inadequacy and to the point of almost being, resentful of everybody, the girl who's next to me, but also the meathead behind her. But, I do think that they do show, some self-awareness as well. But one of the reasons that it's so, one of my favorites is that it's just so damn catchy right off the top with that strumming guitar. And this is one of the few tracks on the album where Jake sings lead. And I just think it fits so well, all the elements. And, again, it is catchy, but ultimately it's the lyrics, I think, that make it so significant to me. It's just that, at this point when I stumbled upon this album, I was just going through a breakup as well. And, you can't resist the feelings of inadequacy, at least to a certain degree, even if, you're culpable for that breakup, but you just sort of, at least when you're 22 years old or whatever and immature, you think it's often, it's about you and you didn't do enough or you failed the relationship in some way. And while, that's not necessarily, there's obviously, more nuance in real life, but there are obviously things that, in this song and in these lyrics that really hit home. And between the hook of the chorus and the upbeat, sort of intro and verses, it's a winner. It's just the most memorable one. And I actually think it was our mutual friend, Andrew the Zoob Zuber, who sent me the link to this single. And I believe it was this song that actually got me into modern baseball and really back into the genre.
The one non-Fall Out Boy, non-Bare Naked Ladies song.
I refuse to believe that Zoob's got anyone into a band. It's never happened.
No, I'm glad you point out the catchiness of the song, Jonah, because that is, a lot of times we dig deep on the albums we love and we get into, why it meant a lot to us or what we took from the lyrics or how the band progressed songwriting wise or structurally or whatever. And sometimes, it is as simple as like, oh, it's a really catchy song and yeah, the lyrics hit, but especially the first time you're going to listen to a band, you're not going to like it has to hook you out of the gate. And I agree that this is the best song if you were going to try to hook someone else on modern baseball and give them a feel of what this band is all about. I think it's Tears Over Beers or See a Sucker, which we played off the top. And Tears Over Beers, just like it builds and flows more naturally as kind of I'll say lead single. They weren't big enough to have lead singles at this point. The Weeknd was the only song that got a video, I'm pretty sure. But that's there. So I want to pull out something else you said, Jonah, and it's in terms of this kind of feeling of inadequacy and really questioning a lot of not only yourself and who you are, but the decisions that you've made. And I think that leading the album off with Redo to take us back to there sets that up well. And what that song is almost literally about is, seeing someone as a redo or wanting a second chance either with them or with the next person. And I think that's something that this album explores through a number of songs, but really with Redo and Redone are the big ones where it's present is, there's a lot of introspection on this album and kind of challenging your own feelings. And I think that over the course of this album, what they establish is that it's pretty unfair to project your own growth onto someone else like that. And you do have to, take the risks of being vulnerable. And we'll talk about kind of the themes the album ends on, which is, the potential payoffs of that vulnerability. But you have to come to that vulnerability in an earnest way where you accept that this is a new thing and it might go differently, rather than this idea of a redo where, hey, you're supposed to be my second chance and it's going to be the same, but I'll just be able to fix it this time. Does that make sense, Jonah?
Yeah, and the thing about redo to me is that, like, even though nominally it's about trying again, I've always felt that chorus sort of reaffirmed how the ennui that they're feeling is kind of unescapable, and even as the narrator in the song is trying to resuscitate his lust for life in the wake of a breakup or whatever, he just ends up falling into that familiar sinkhole of listlessness and just says, sort of, screw it to the whole emotional / thought exercise. When he says, halt that, I'm thinking way too much at night. When he's, after saying, try to forget that your bones will dismantle. So I've always felt that was interesting too. So it sort of complicates the notion of a clean start over too, which is, very fitting given the other themes on this album. Yeah.
And, I do want to talk more about that running theme of inadequacy. And I think another one of your favorites on the album does a good job of that. And that is The Weeknd.
Though I seem cool, calm, and collected, making my way to hipster with glasses was a little more than just nerve-wracking. Kinda just counted on her to turn me into goo. Praise whatever and end it with a smile, 'cause for a bit it's had a little while. I expected you to save the day with sly remarks like, he's so cute and whatever you want. Though the white jacket didn't fit, the friends I came with did perfectly. Snugged right to my body like sad movies and late night drinks. Could've guessed by the end of the hour there was more than just a little smile on my face, covered in custard and cookies and cream. Pissed off I had to leave, but all has to end. You got a smile that could light this town, and we might need it, 'cause it gets dark around here, real dark around here. Most of my old friends I can only stand for the weekend, but that doesn't apply here. Doesn't apply here.
Yeah, and much like with Tears Over Beers, as much as the lyrics really, thematically and lyrically different, it's just such a catchy song, and this is anthemic, and it really sort of typifies the sense of community that was so big for modern baseball. And you just, when you hear this song, you just think about a crowded bar singing, "You got a smile that can light this town, and we might need it, because it gets dark around here." And I think this one is kind of a breath of fresh air and a light in what is lyrically an overwhelmingly dark album, because it underscores how deep and meaningful friendships, and sometimes just one person, can shift your entire perspective. So it feels almost a little bit restorative without, obviously imbuing you with too good of a feeling, because it's still, a modern baseball album.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to put it. Jake, do you have thoughts on these two songs that we played, or just kind of, I mean, it's not like you haven't been a single guy with some unrequited love or trying dating online in the early 2000s as well.
Yeah, I think that they are sort of what Jonah was saying. They sort of speak to a lot of that time for me, but I have to admit, they're not a band. I don't know why, but they're not a band that I ever really pay attention to their lyrics so much. Maybe because I never did like a deep dive on them. But I always found that and maybe it's because of like where I was in my sort of musical journey, so to speak. I always found that they're a rare band for me where like the sound and the music was more impactful to me. And I was always struck by how similar, like just from where they were drawing from, like especially their very obvious Weaker Thans influence, which, as we've talked about before, are obviously one of my favorites. And then hearing that in sort of a more emo pop punk frame was kind of like, oh, okay, I can get behind this. But they were never a band that I ever really connected to, if that makes sense, even though I did like them. So the sort of deeper thoughts and deeper meanings of their songs I've never really given them much thought, I suppose, as I might have for other bands saying similar things.
Well, let me throw a lyric at you and just see if this resonates then. Off the song At Chloe, where the song is literally about, sitting there on your phone or on your computer post-breakup and looking at the other person's stuff and knowing they're looking at your stuff. And there's the line, now that you saw my tweets, you know that I'm home, which is, that's the tough thing, right? Do you post? Do you not post?
Of course.
Do you post through it? There's posting through it.
It's signing in and out of MSN.
Yes. But this is just I'm tweeting, so I'm around. And then there's also, of course, I think you were in my profile picture once, which is really driving that home. And then as strong as the album is thematically, and as much as Jonah and I connect with it in that regard, Jake, I do think you have a point that it is, also just a good album musically, like Jonah said, with the catchiness. There's also, they play around with, or I think maybe because it's their debut, they're not really restricted by any one genre. So there are some tracks on here that are pop punk tracks. There are tracks you could classify as kind of Midwest emo. There's some kind of indie folk stuff where they get to show a bit more musicianship and the vocal talent at play with both singers, as well as some harmonizing that comes in from Adrian Gold, who has released some solo stuff and also in the band Catnaps. So I want to play one more song off this album to kind of just highlight the different directions that they went with some of these songs. And this is a song called Cook.
I'm circling the drain with all my problems in hand. Well, I've got a pretty good hand, I'd say, but these new caskets crack the same. The first few stones are the worst. They fall in unnoticed and scare you for more than they're worth. And all at once you will not hear your own words. But I got a spotless record. Oh, maybe it's harder to stay, and we got it all wrong from the start. Maybe it's all in the cards, just an excuse for playing. Oh, maybe it's all in our hearts. Maybe I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm saying it anyway.
So I like Cook a lot because I think, to Jonah's point about some of the songs in this album, or the album as a whole, being restorative, I think that's kind of where it starts to pick up for me. Oh, by the way, the songs with Adrian Gold harmonizing are Play Ball and the Profile Pic song, which are both really good. So Cook to me is, there's this message about literally pulling yourself out of the drain spiral, with the idea being that, yes, sometimes it can feel like death would be better than the process of dying, but there is this allure of hope. And while I joked about Redone not being the closer because it would bookend the titles nicely, the album builds to Coles as a closer, which I think is a lovely way to wrap up Jonah's point about the restorative nature of what they're grappling with over the course of this album. And that song ends the album basically to say, just to find out in the end, I'll never stop falling in love. I'm all right, and I'm always getting better. We'll let the fire burn high because we like it that way. We don't mind the burn. We'll never let it go out. So I think, to me, that's kind of, you've walked through the steps of a breakup over this album, basically, where and even on Lookout, where over the course of like a 1-minute song, it goes from, oh, I'm post breakup and I'm moving forward and miss me now that this is over, to, okay, well, I said that I was always looking forward, but my head's on a swivel. And then the song ends like in a blink of an eye with, no, I'm going to get you back. And I think that this whole album kind of goes through that, but ends in a healthier place where, to me, Coles ends on a, yeah, this stuff's tough and you're going to have to put yourself through more of this. But you know, those ups and downs and especially the ups or even the allure of the ups is kind of why you keep pushing. Jonah, do you take that away from this album as well?
Yeah, I do. And I think it is a testament to the fact they were just so damn young when they put this album out, that, you know, they still had tons of optimism in spite of all the heartbreak and stuff. And, you know, I think that it got harder for them, especially as Bren delved deeper into their mental health problems, to maintain that ultimate glimmer of optimism. But very much, you know, even though this album vacillates between, you know, tremendous hopelessness at times and then, you know, feelings of, you know, maybe this could be okay, ultimately, that it's, you know, something that you know, wasn't necessarily a constant throughout their, you know, brief discography, but it's definitely present here, which is, you know, really nice.
For sure. And Jake, again, I know you didn't go through a ton with this album lyrically, but does Cook stand out to you at all, or does Cole stand out to you at all as an album closer, or do you have a thought on the album structure at all before we get into kind of the reception?
Not really structure. I will say that Cook is my favorite song on the album.
Oh, good. I'm glad I included that one.
Yeah, I think it's a good sign of sort of where they would go on the next one, which is sort of my intro to them. And I think it was sort of a more interesting musically song. Structure-wise, not really. I've never really looked at it from a concept perspective before, but I do agree with you that it should have been bookended with Redo and Redone is my big structure note. Because like,
just for the title,
come on,
anyway.
Like it has to be.
Yeah.
I believe that I read somewhere, either Bren or Jake, commenting that Redone was supposed to mark a demarcation thematically in the album where they commit to sort of a different outlook. Now, I may be misquoting or entirely fabricating that, but I could have sworn I read that somewhere, that Redo was sort of, you know, focusing on certain elements, but then Redone, they shifted their perspective, or at least tried to.
See, if that's the case, I love that. If that's true, I'm into
that.
I
don't know that I agree with it, just because the back half then is only 5 songs and one of them is Lookout, which very much does not fit that theme. I always just weirdly thought, so in See Ya Sucker, which we played at the very start of this episode, there's the line, I reckon you grew up in a town that said reckon all the time. And then on Redone, there's the, you stole my heart like I stole your hometown lingo. And I just, those two lyrics pair together to me, but they're out of order in the way they appear in the album. So maybe that is the case. I certainly agree that Cook, See Ya Sucker, Play Ball, and Coles like definitely fit a second half that thinks like that. Maybe Lookout is supposed to be kind of the moment of lapse to drive home that this stuff isn't linear. But that's an interesting thought. I didn't come across that in my research, Jonah, but I will, that's a nice
I may have made it up.
No, it makes sense. And if you made it up, who's going to fact check? We don't have a fact checker. Daniel Dale's not coming on this podcast.
That'd be a good episode, though.
Yeah. CNN would have to approve it, though, and I don't know if they're going to do that. Guys, we're going to talk about how this album was received, and we're going to talk a little bit about You're Gonna Miss It All after this. All right, so the aftermath of this one's pretty straightforward. They only released the one music video the weekend. They did their first bit of touring and played a few festivals in 2013. They moved to Run for Cover Records for You're Gonna Miss It All, which came out in 2014. That's generally regarded as the bigger of the two albums, and as Jake said, it's where he got more into them. I had it just behind Sports on my all-decade list, so it's not like it's a bad album by any means. It's kind of a coin flip between these two. So I guess I'll ask Jonah, why did you prefer to do Sports to You're Gonna Miss It All?
I just think it had a bigger impact on me. You know, it was, like I said, the album that really reintroduced me to the genre. And while You're Gonna Miss It All may be stronger overall, I mean, the first 3 songs are absolutely killer. But, I just think that Sports was slightly more meaningful for me personally. So it was just purely selfish reasons.
And then Jake, to the other side of that, was it just a timing thing for you with You're Gonna Miss It All, or is there, are your favorite MoBo tracks off of that album?
Yeah, both, I guess. Definitely a timing thing. Like, I missed sports completely when it came out and then went back to it much later. But yeah, I think You're Gonna Miss It All is definitely my favorite of the three records they put out. I definitely think it's the strongest. As Jonah said, especially like the first, 3-4 tracks, and then Your Graduation, I think are all great songs. Find Great is such a strong, like, opening punch. I actually think they're really good at opening tracks in general, because I think Wedding Singer is one of the better modern baseball songs as well. But yeah, I think You're Gonna Miss It All it's the only one of theirs I go back to frequently, I would say. I think it's a really well-made record, and I think they sort of the perfect encapsulation of their sound that a lot of these bands from this era sort of have, like that one record that it's kind of like, this is what this band sounds like, and this is what you need to know about this band.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm going to play a song that I think fits that, and that song is Rock Bottom.
See here, are you making out? I can hear you guys on the couch. Shut up and make out to something already. I'm waiting. After reading that text from your friend, I started losing all my confidence. So I'll stay tight, I know soon I'll be bailing. Then you ask if I gotta leave, and I wish that I could say no. From hurting, and now I'm turning to you, scared shitless, hoping this all goes well. Then we highlight the fact that my mouth smells of coffee and garlic. The 5 cups I had this morning are getting to me. I gotta go, I got the worst fucking spins. Then you ask if I gotta leave, and I wish that I could say no, but we're so caught up in the moment, and I just need a second to catch my goddamn breath. To hell with the spin top stand. There's no good reason why I should leave your bed tomorrow. We can watch Planet Earth and brainstorm tattoos.
Jonah, I believe that's another one of your favorite MoBo songs, is it not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's a good one. It's a good one. So You're Gonna Miss It All was bigger success. They subsequently toured with the Wonder Years. Then they got their own headline nod, which, as we mentioned off the top, came with Foxing playing alongside them. They then released Holy Ghost in 2016, which is more of a traditional kind of Midwest emo turn. Good album that I didn't love as much initially because I wanted a repeat of You're Gonna Miss It All. But to go back to Holy Ghost is very strong. This is around the same time that Jake and I saw them, and around the same time that Jonah saw them and dishonored his family. Holy Ghost also has, or the Holy Ghost era of modern baseball also has a bit of a legacy in terms of, I do think all three of their albums kind of pushed the genre and pushed a lot that was going on musically, but they're also credited with around that time helping to not only attack the idea of mental health struggle head on, but also making their concerts safer spaces for that. And that's more than just creating the space to talk about those issues. It's also to create physically safe spaces at their shows. So, they had safety hotlines at all their shows for harassment or discrimination. They had gender neutral bathrooms. There was an article in the AV Club by David Anthony in 2016 called "A Philly Pop Punk Band is Changing Music by Giving a Shit About Its Fans," in which he writes, "Listen to Holy Ghost and it's clear that there's a healing quality to its art. Fans flock to the band because the performances have become their version of therapy. Modern baseball doesn't just weave mental illness into its songs. The band has found ways to extend its compassion to its live shows. MoBo transforms rock clubs into safe spaces, opening a dialogue about struggles that would typically be consigned to subtext. There's also more from the lyric side. Greg Barnett of the Menzingers told Dazed, it's really cool when bands like Modern Baseball can be that voice for people who struggle and show them, hey, it's okay to feel this way and think this way, and we're here to help. It's working and attitudes are changing. So I actually think that, Jake, that MoBo Joyce show that we went to was, I think, the first time I can remember there being like a message at the start of a show of like, hey, be cool to each other. And if someone's not being cool, here's how to safely get help and make this space safe. And it was, I'm pretty sure, the first time I can remember seeing gender neutral bathrooms at a show as well. Did that stand out to you guys at all when you saw MoBo? Jonah, I know you might not remember, but Jake, so I guess I'll kick that to you first, since you might recollect that night like 10% better than Jonah.
Yes and no. I think that they're not the first band that I've seen do like the, hey, take care of each other, don't kick each other in the head spiel before a show. But I do think, to your point, especially around like gender neutral washrooms and making it a welcoming space for everybody rather than just like, don't kick people in the head. I'm not sure they're the first band I've seen do that, but I do think they sort of are at the forefront, both because they are sort of at the forefront of this pop punk emo revival, of which this is obviously a big thing at concerts, along with, bands like Pup and Camp Cope and lots of bands that actually seem to care about their fans. But I do think, because of their stature in the scene at the time, it was very important for them to do that. And it certainly makes me appreciate them more and like them more. And also, ironically, semi-ironically, the first time I saw them at a show, someone actually tried to backflip into the crowd to crowd surf and ended up hitting their head, and they had to like stop the show and bring an ambulance in. It was kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah, that's surprising to hear. Anyway, so to kind of round this or close this part out on a more dour note, although you hope it's for the positive. So Bren left the band in 2017 to focus on their mental and physical well-being. The band kind of worked on separate things. Bren on some solo stuff, Jake on Slaughter Beach Dog, which feels at least a little bit MoBo adjacent. I don't like it quite as much as Modern Baseball, but I have spun those albums and they're not bad. In February 2017, Jake posted a Facebook message saying that while the band champions mental health, they'd been ignoring their own. And that they were taking an indefinite hiatus for that purpose. They also linked out to the Buddy Project for anyone else needing help with those things. So that's kind of where MoBo's legacy's at now. It doesn't sound like there's an imminent end to that hiatus or anything like that. There's been no even really rumblings of it. So that's where we're at with Modern Baseball, and where we're at on this podcast is now we gotta rank some favorite songs off of this one. So Jonah, do you have a top 2, 3, 4 off of sports? Did you do a whole expand the zone power rankings of these? Where are you taking us in terms of rankings?
Man, I found it extremely difficult. So I think I'm taking the coward's way out and just picking a couple. And there's, I think for me, there's a clear top 2 in Tears Over Beers and The Weeknd, but I mean, there isn't really a bad song on this album that I'm inclined to skip over. I love the acoustic efforts. Like, I think you were in my profile picture once, especially, as you mentioned, with the harmonies with Adrian Gold. It's so superb, so gut-wrenching. And Chloe, I mean, not only is it catchy as hell, but it is so willing to be, hyper literal and really explicate what it's like being that terminally online dude who's going through something difficult romantically, and sort of how pathetic it can be at times. And they don't shy away from that. And I love that track so much. And See a Sucker's so good. And I Reckon You Grew Up in a Town Where They Said Reckon All the Time is such a killer, indelible, unforgettable lyric. And yeah, I know I'm sort of cheating right here, but ultimately, okay,
yeah, you're just listing all the songs.
I'm sorry,
okay.
I'm listing every song, but I'm going to say my favorites are Tears Over Beers, The Weeknd, and you know what? I'm going to keep to those two. They're in the top tier.
Yes. Jake, what about you, man? I know you said Cook is your favorite off this album. Do you have a 2, 3?
Yeah, I would say Cook, Redone, and probably The Weeknd would be my top 3.
We're in an interesting spot here in terms of mixtape choice. I would say I think See a Sucker is my top one, and then I would have it probably Cook, and from there, Tears Over Beers. So I guess, from here we have to pick a song for the mixtape, and sometimes, Jonah, that just ends up being the one we all agree is the best. Sometimes we want it to be the one that best snapshots the conversation we've had. It can be kind of whatever, and we tend to defer to the guest in this case. Which song that we've talked about today do you feel is the best representation for the podcast's mixtape?
It's got to be Tears Over Beers. I know that it can be, a little, I don't know if cheesy is the right word, but
on the nose.
Yeah, it's definitely on the nose, and it typifies them, I think, in perhaps not the most flattering way, but at the same time, it's a banger of a song, and it touches on so many of the themes that they explore, thoroughly, and that are central to their band. And I'm going with that one.
Any objections, Jake?
Not at all.
All right, Tears Over Beers, going on the mixtape. You can also follow Jonah at Birenbaum on all your socials. Excellent MLB writer over at The Score. We also want to thank producer Dylan, who, anytime it's a 3-man episode, it's going to be a little tougher. He's got to edit out that one part where Jonah was really mean to me and didn't take the bait on a topic tee up. And then that whole time when Jonah was only speaking in lyrics, which you guys are going to think is only the 3 minutes that make the episode. There was like 45 minutes where Jonah refused to say anything but lyrics, which is what Jonah does.
We call that
Jonah,
my
thank
20s.
you so much for coming on, man. This was great.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me, boys.
Yeah, that and Seinfeld references.
That hasn't stopped, though.
My goal is to make it to 50 without ever having an original thought or articulating something that wasn't already previously written by someone else.
It's a good thing you're a baseball writer, then.
I was going to say, please don't put any of my articles into a plagiarism detector, because,
please
never
don't
mind.
tell people.
Edit that part out too.
Yeah, edit that part out. Look, if you like Jonah's baseball writing, that's great, and we encourage that. If you don't, there's company in the comments at The Score, so you can head in there. And Jonah's favorite Instagram activity, other than posting himself singing at concerts, is posting the negative feedback he gets on his articles. But this is the issue when you have the best takes, is that only an elite class of baseball analysts can understand the take, right, Jonah?
Precisely. I aim to make it as inaccessible and esoteric as possible, so that I can weed out the normies.
Real heads only. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again to Jonah and producer Dylan, and to Jake.
Please try the fish.
This is the part of the night where I get delusional and I start doing crazy shit.